So let's bring in Bob Woodward. It was his reporting about General Milley in his new book, Peril, that prompted key portions of today's questioning. The book is co-authored with Robert Costa. Bob, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Good to see you. So General Milley was asked today about the call that you broke in your book, his call with the Chinese counterpart on January 8th, 2 days after the insurrection. You wrote about it on the very first page of your book. The general described the call as routine, even though he had to reassure China the U.S. was stable and Trump wasn't secretly planning a strike against them. Take a listen.
And I told him that we are not going to attack. President Trump has no intent to attack. And I told him that repeatedly. And I told him if there was going to be an attack, there'll be plenty of communications going back and forth. Your intel system's going to pick it up. I said, I'll probably call you. Everybody will be calling you. We're not going to attack you. Just settle down. It's not going to happen.
Now, you write in your book, you reported it took an hour and a half for Milley to convey that to his Chinese counterpart. And when Milley hung up, you write, quote, he was convinced the situation was grave. Lee, Milley's Chinese counterpart, remained unusually rattled, putting the two nations on the knife edge of disaster. From your reporting, how close was the U.S. to some kind of military conflict?
Well, Milley's whole point in this is that miscommunication is the seed of war. And as we know now, the relations with China, I mean, all of these exercises going on around Taiwan and the South China Sea, it is a danger. It could not be more of a dangerous environment. As we know, China's on the march. They are reasserting themselves in many ways. And if you examine these, and I've done this for about 50 years,
right.
And I've rarely seen a case where the reporting is substantiated by a participant under oath. He did say that he is not qualified to determine the mental health of the President of the United States.
Which is not to say he doesn't have an opinion, though.
Yeah, that's right. It's not a denial of what is in the transcript, which is very forceful, confirmed. I suspect lots of people over the years have said somebody's crazy, and they, too, would acknowledge they are not qualified to determine whether that is medically or psychologically true.
Yeah, I want to get to that in 1 second, but
Yes.
Just as a quick button on this, do you think if General Milley, based on your reporting, had not made that call, had not made that effort to convince General Lee, his counterpart, General Lee L.I., his counterpart, not to overreact, do you think it's possible that something might have happened?
I mean, Milley felt that's the case. And if you look at this and you go to the environment, the first call was October 30th, 4 days before the election, the most contentious election in modern history. And Trump was out there accusing China. It's the China virus. He was saying things about the election. And all of a sudden you get, which Milley acknowledged today, very sensitive intelligence that the Chinese think we're going to attack them. That is the disaster environment for somebody in the military, because as Milley told his senior staff, you might wind up getting a Pearl Harbor where someone will make the first move. And we don't know what would have happened if he hadn't done this. But if you look at, these are reasonable precautions. We found no evidence, and Bob Costa and I had months to look at this, that Milley had done anything other than what he felt in a crisis moment was, I'm going to do the maximum amount to protect the country.
Protect the United States and make sure no lives were shed unnecessarily. General Milley, let's talk about his conversation with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was worried that Trump would go rogue and launch nuclear strikes. Take a listen.
She was concerned and made various personal references characterizing the president. I explained to her that the president is the sole nuclear launch authority and he doesn't launch them alone, and that I am not qualified to determine the mental health of the President of the United States.
Now, that does not contradict your reporting, which is that Pelosi says, and you had unbelievable, you had a transcript of this conversation.
Yes.
Pelosi says to Milley about Trump, you know he's crazy. He's been crazy for a long time. And Milley says later in the exchange, Madam Speaker, I agree with you on everything.
And then he later says, I agree with you 100%. I mean, there's no ambiguity there. Look, what the book shows is that he responded most significantly, and I thought this is something he would not touch in an unclassified public briefing, that he was so worried that he called in the officers from the National Military Command Center, this is the Pentagon War Room, and said, make sure I am in the loop as procedures called. The last time we saw that happen was 1974 when Secretary of Defense Schlesinger did the same thing because he was worried about Nixon and his mental state. So this was a moment of maximum peril. You have somebody under pressure. You know, we sit in, Costa and I pontificated a little on this, but, you know, well, what should he do? You learn from very sensitive intelligence that the Chinese think we're going to, this is a crisis moment. You have a practical problem to talk General Lee down.
Right.
And he said some things that he explained today, we explain in our book. This is not to tip the Chinese off. This is to make sure in their 5-year relationship that we're going to talk to each other if there are tensions. You will see a buildup. So, and I've said this before, and Bob Costa said it before, when this is all washed out, those who are saying that General Milley actually was treasonous in what he did, I think are going to owe the general an apology.
So let's talk about the fact that of the steps he took to try to prevent any sort of nuclear strike, because at one point you write that General Milley tells Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, there's not a snowball's chance in hell this president or any president can launch nuclear weapons illegally, immorally, unethically, without proper certification. But I have to ask, based on the chain of command, and there are people who have been trying to change this.
Yes.
Did Milley take any steps that would have led him to be able to stop Trump if he was about to launch nukes, or just to bring him in the loop?
Yeah, to bring him in the loop so he would be at the table and presumably raise his hand and say, wait a minute, is this necessary? Is this one of these occasions when we're going to use nuclear weapons?
But presidents have the power pretty much unilaterally to launch a nuclear strike.
Right, and Milley, as he said, he did not take away any of Trump's power. He just said, you know, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is not in the chain of command. He's adjacent to the command, to the chain of command. And what he did, let's enforce the procedures that do exist and make sure it is a caution, and it is a caution. James Schlesinger, the defense secretary, in 1974, God, that's almost 50 years ago, exercised the same precaution. Why? Because Trump actually set the stage for all of this with his actions and his denunciations, and Milley and others experienced this screaming in the Oval Office. We have the scenes in the book. I mean,
it's crazy. No, it's really well rendered and really important. I do want to say, just for anybody watching right now, especially any lawmakers, we might want to think about the idea whether or not the United States should just have one person, whatever party, be able to just determine whether or not to unilaterally launch a nuclear strike, changing, perhaps even ending the world. Something for us to think about. The founders weren't really hip on the nuclear weapon thing when they created our balance of power.
They did not, and this is something that is not clear. And lots of experts, and they ought to look at it, and they ought to settle it, and people ought to know there may be no more important matter that the legislature and the executive should take up.
Yeah, a very important lesson from a very important book. The book is called Peril. Bob Woodward, always great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.